أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. لا إله إلا شكرا. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة، وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. طبعا سيدنا لكم أسعد الله أيامنا وأيامكم بذكرى ميلاد سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا حبيب الحسين علي بن الحسين الأكبر صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. الليلة أو اليوم حسب أمتى بلش شعبان عند الشخص ميلاد مولانا علي الأكبر في 11 من شعبان سلام الله عليه، فأسعد الله أيامكم. In our last lesson, we were speaking about the conditions of prayer, the parts of prayer, and specifically the arkan, so the pillars of prayer. And we mentioned that the reason we're mentioning these points is as we read the masail, the verdicts in the chapter of khalal, the chapter regarding errors or mistakes done in prayer, understanding these verdicts will depend on understanding the arkan and also understanding what do we mean when we say parts of prayer, for example, or the conditions of prayer. So we said that in salat, in prayer, you have conditions of the validity of the prayer. When these conditions are not fulfilled, what happens? The prayer becomes invalid. An example of these conditions is the presence of wudu. You need to have wudu to pray. Without wudu, your prayer is what? Invalid. Thus, our scholars keep on telling the believers to ensure that their wudu is correct. Because if the wudu is incorrect, meaning it is done in a way where it's invalid, what happens? The prayer becomes invalid. So if someone doesn't learn wudu properly, what happens? Possibly after 20, 40, 60 years, he listens to a lecture by some scholar, finds out that his wudu is wrong, and then finds out that he has 20 or 40 or 60 years of qada to perform. He could have avoided that mistake by simply learning wudu, learning how to perform wudu properly when he was a child or, when he was close to bulugh, close to bulugh. This is why you'll realize when people go to Hajj, the instructors who are present, the guides in Hajj, they usually check the wudu of the pilgrims. So they ask the Hujjaj, they come to them and they examine them one by one. They tell them, مثلا, Fulan, perform wudu in front of me. Jayyid, Fulan, perform wudu in front of me. Or at least tell me how do you do wudu. Jayyid. Of course, if the guide is a male and he's speaking to a sister, he won't tell her to do wudu in front of him, but he'll tell her, explain wudu. Like, how do you do wudu? Jayyid. To ensure that their wudu is correct. Why? Because certain rituals of Hajj, certain worships in Hajj depend on wudu. Jayyid. Your wudu has to be valid for those worships to be valid. So instead of waiting till we go to Hajj, let's do it when we're children or when we're close to bulugh. Jayyid. If someone's already baligh and he has not done that yet, let him, ensure that his wudu is correct by speaking to a scholar or someone who knows how to properly do wudu, like house students, for example. If you don't have water, the general rule is when you don't have water, you do tayammum. Jayyid. But there are details regarding when can you do tayammum. Yeah, تفضل. That's tayammum. So tayammum is done with what? With earth, like مثلا sand, um, as you said, the dirt, like the soil of the earth, pebbles. You could use also pebbles, provided that something sticks on your hand completely smooth, such that when you do tayammum with it, there's no uh, um, dust left on your hand from the pebble. Yeah. So going back to the main topic, we said wudu is one of the conditions of what? Of the validity of prayer. Another condition is the purity of the body. A third condition is the purity of the clothing. Then we went into the parts and we said there are several wajibat, several mandatory parts of prayer, but among those parts we have al-arkan. We have things that are called pillars. Jayid? Can someone remind me of the pillars? What are the pillars in prayer? Fadal Habibi. Ahsant. So, niyyah, number one, the intention. Number two, takbirat al-ihram, the opening takbirah. Number three, al-qiyam, standing up. And we said there are four types of qiyam. Two are arkan and two are not. Which two types of qiyam are arkan? Yes. The qiyam that you perform when you're doing takbirat al-ihram. Okay, and that's wajib but not rukn. That's also wajib. So we're left with which one? Ahsant. The qiyam right before ruku'. That's also a rukn. So we said we have four types of qiyam. You have qiyam. When we say qiyam, we're talking about standing up. You're standing on both feet. Jayyid. You're facing the qibla. That's called qiyam. So when you stand up, standing up during takbirat al-ihram is mandatory. And it's not only mandatory, it's a rukn, it's a pillar. Standing up when you are reciting the two chapters or reciting the tasbihat in the third or fourth rak'ah, that's also wajib, but it's not a rukn, not a pillar. So those are two types of what? Qiyam. A third, تفضل جمال.
Arkan salat are things that if they are not done, invalidate prayer completely, correct?
هلا we're going to get to the definition, inshallah. Yes.
Okay, shukran.
Okay, no problem. We're going to get to the definition, and we're going to see that Sayyid al-Kazim al-Yazdi, rahimahullah, has a definition. Sayyid Sistani has a slightly different definition. We'll look at both, inshallah ta'ala. So the second type of qiyam is standing up whilst you are reciting the two chapters or whilst you're reciting the tasbihat al-arba during the third or fourth rak'ah. That's wajib, but it's not a rukn, not a pillar. The third type of qiyam is what? Standing up before ruku'. That's a pillar. It's a rukn. And the last type of qiyam is standing up after ruku'. That's wajib, but it's not a rukn. واضح? Then we have ruku', bowing down. And finally, we have the two sajdas of one rak'ah. Those two, the two sajdas together, the two sajdas of one rak'ah, they're also a rukn, also a pillar. So those are the pillars in salat. I'm not writing them down right now because we wrote them down last week. We're just trying to refresh our memory so we can continue where we left off. Abdullah. Ahsan, that's a good question. So for the students who are online, Abdullah is asking, what is the difference between the qiyam that we perform when we're reciting the two surahs and the qiyam that takes place before ruku'? Aren't all qiyams connected? And the answer, Abdullah, is naturally those qiyams will be connected, yes. Meaning when I'm paying attention to what I'm doing, I'm not in a state of unawareness. I will remain standing, Jayyid. I will stand up when I'm reciting the two surahs. If I've done takbirat al-ihram, I'm already standing up. Sah? I'll remain standing when I perform the two surahs, when I recite them. And before ruku', I'll be also standing up. Jayyid. I'll say Allahu Akbar, and then I'll go into ruku'. That's if I'm what? If I'm paying attention to what I'm doing. But sometimes what happens, a person goes through a state of sahu, a state of unawareness. And he might do something that he pays attention to later on. So, hypothetically speaking, suppose someone stood in his salat, he did takbirat al-ihram, Allahu Akbar. And then for some reason, he went through a state of sahu, a state of unawareness, and he sat down. Then he recited al-Fatiha and Surah al-Ikhlas. Now he's sitting down, صح? Jayyid. He finished Surah al-Ikhlas. Now he wants to go into ruku'. Is he allowed to simply go into ruku' as he's sitting down? That state of unawareness finishes where? It finishes, it goes away when he's done Surah al-Ikhlas. So he finishes Surah al-Ikhlas. He says, لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. All of a sudden he thinks, wait, what am I doing? I'm sitting down. I should be standing up. He doesn't say these words. He just thinks about them, right? So now he wants to go into ruku'. So can he go into ruku' as he's sitting down? He can't. He'll tell himself, you know what? I'm going to stand up, but I won't stand up and then go into ruku'. No. I'll stand up in a way where I go automatically into ruku' without, properly standing up. So he's on the ground, right? He's sitting down and he stands up like this. Subhana Rabbi al-Azim wa bihamdih. And he doesn't stand up, doesn't properly stand up, and then go into ruku'. Would that be allowed? It wouldn't. Lesh, because we said before ruku', Allah wants you to be standing up. طيب, inti, you were praying and you went through a state of sahu, a state of unawareness. Hence, you recited al-Fatiha and Surah al-Ikhlas as you were sitting down. Allah forgives you. He says, okay, sure. We'll let that one pass. Why? Because the qiyam that you should do when you're reciting the two surahs is wajib, but it's not a rukn. And the person omitted that qiyam out of unawareness. So Allah tells him, all right, I'll let that go. That's fine. Your salat is still valid. But now, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to get up. Yeah, so he's sitting down. He gets up. He stands properly. Allahu Akbar. And now he goes into ruku'. Subhana Rabbi al-Azimi wa bihamdih. واضح? So that's the issue. Yes. So when he remembers that he's sitting down, that whilst he's reading, should he repeat the Fatiha if he remembers if he remembers before he completes the second surah? That's your question? I'd have to check. Right now, I'm not sure. Yes, Sayyid Ali. That would be safer for sure. Yeah, so if you're reciting the Fatiha and you want to itch your nose, it would be safer to just stop talking and then itch your nose. Because if you do that, your salat is valid for sure. But are you able to actually make that movement as you're reciting Surah Al-Fatiha? You itch your nose? That I'd have to check. Again, I'm unsure at the moment. I forgot the حكم. Mm. Okay. Yes. Closing your eyes in salat is makruh. It's disliked. No problem. شو اسمه انت to remain focused in salat, look at the places Allah wants you to look at when you're in salat. So the positions of prayer, depending on the position you're in or the wajib that you're performing, Allah Ta'ala wants you to look at a different spot. So مثلا when you're standing, it's mustahab, not wajib, it's recommended to look at موضع السجود, the place where you put your forehead when you prostrate. When you're in ruku', it's recommended to look between your legs, between your feet. When, yes, yeah. So it's mustahab, it's recommended to look between your feet when you are, to look at the spot between your feet. جيد. When you are in ruku'. When you're sitting down, it's recommended to look at your lap. When you're in sujood, it's recommended to look towards your nose. جيد. That's basically the what Allah Ta'ala wants you to look at in those parts of salat. It's not wajib, but it's mustahab. It's recommended. When you do that, it helps you focus. But if you're looking right and left, مثلا you're reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, and you're looking at the surroundings, you're gonna get preoccupied with what you're seeing. You won't focus. يا حبيبي. You can point. Pointing is fine. But again, in general, keep the following point in mind because it will ensure that your salat is valid. If you want to make a movement and you're unsure whether that movement can be done as you're talking, just remain silent, do the movement, which obviously will not invalidate the salat because it will not break the form of salat. Okay? If it breaks the form of salat, no, that's a problem. Okay? And then you continue reciting whatever you were reciting. جيد. So مثلا I'm يلا جاي. So مثلا suppose I'm reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. جيد. And there's a spider beside my son. Okay? I point to the spider. So he watches out. I'll remain silent. I'm in مثلا مالك يوم الدين. مالك يوم الدين. I point. He sees the spider. Then I continue my salat. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. That's fine. It's okay. It doesn't invalidate the prayer. Same goes for مثلا tapping. مثلا my kids are fighting. جيد. As I'm doing salat, I stop the recitation and I tap my lap. وقف, stop. That's also okay. But again, the action I'm doing does not break the form of salat. If it breaks the form of salat, that's a problem. Yes. Mm-hmm. Let me check. Yeah. Yes.
Like you can just close your eyes and then just because sometimes the next my head will never work. I listen.
You can close your eyes, but it's not haram to close your eyes in salat. It won't invalidate the salat, but it's makruh. It's disliked. عرفت كيف? So in general, it's disliked to close your eyes in salat. Yeah.
feel like after that, feel like that's pretty. It always makes my head hurt whenever.
When your eyes are open, it's not haram. So technically, you can do it. Yeah, technically, you can do it. It's not haram, and it doesn't invalidate the salat. Yeah, just make sure you don't sleep. Jayyid. Closing your eyes in sujood is sometimes tricky. Yeah. طيب. So we spoke about the arkan. Let me see how much time we have left. Yeah. We spoke about the arkan, right? Now, what is a rukn? What's the definition of a rukn? Last week, actually the week before, we mentioned the definition quickly. Today I want to shed more light on this issue. So we find that Sayyid Kazim al-Yazdi, one of our previous maraja, who wrote a very important book called Al-Urwat al-Wuthqa, rahmatullah alayh, he presents a definition. And then Sayyid Sistani presents a definition that's slightly different. Let me write this man's name down. No, I want you to keep in mind. I want you to keep his book in mind. One day, hopefully you can read it and benefit from it. So his name is Sayyid Kazim al-Yazdi, rahmatullah alayh. And he is the author, Mu'allif al-Urwatul Wuthqa. He wrote a book of jurisprudence called Al-Urwa al-Wuthqa. And because this book is so important, a bunch of maraja, a good amount of maraja, they came and they wrote footnotes as they explained Al-Urwa al-Wuthqa, or they presented the verdicts where they differed with Sayyid Kazim al-Yazdi. One of the special traits of this book, or one of the special, things about it, is that it's very detailed, super detailed. So usually Sayyid Kazim al-Yazdi, rahimahullah, will mention any verdict that might come to your mind. That's what he tried to do with Al-Urwa al-Wuthqa. So مثلا in the chapter of, let's say, wudu, right? People have questions. Sayyid al-Yazdi rahimahullah tried to think of every question. He tried to think of every question that comes to your mind, and he wrote the verdicts that would answer those questions. The same pertains to any other chapter of fiqh that he mentioned in that book. So it's extremely detailed. Whereas you'll find when you come to other books of jurisprudence, with all due respect to all of our ulama, to all of our scholars, you'll find when you come to other books of jurisprudence that sometimes some details are omitted. Jayyid, which is normal, because at the end of the day, there are just too many verdicts, too many circumstances or situations that the marja can mention. So he chooses the verdicts that he believes are very needed or really needed. Tamam? Al-Yazdi rahmatullah alayh, he went to a different level. As I told you, his book is extremely detailed and it's very enjoyable. If you like fiqh, when you read Al-Urwa Al-Wuthqa, you enjoy it because of the precision and the details in that book. So what did he say about Al-Arkan? What are Al-Arkan? He said, the Arkan are basically the parts that lead to the nullification of the prayer. They make the prayer batil if omitted or added, purposely or out of unawareness. Jayid? Let's write that down and then we'll try to understand what Sayyid al-Yazdi is saying. So according to Sayyid al-Yazdi, may Allah bless his soul, the arkan, the pillars, are the parts of prayer that lead to the nullification of the prayer if added or omitted purposely or due to unawareness. So they are obviously essential parts of the prayer, and adding these parts in the prayer or omitting them will make the prayer batil. That's what we mean when we say nullification. Okay? Whether someone is doing that purposely or he's doing it out of unawareness. Those are the arkan. Now, when we say you add them to the prayer, we mean that you perform an extra rukn. We have arkan. Every rak'ah has a bunch of arkan, right? That have to be done. Can I add more arkan? No. If you purposely add the arkan, what's going to happen? You're going to, if you purposely add a rukn, your prayer will be invalid. What if I do it out of unawareness? According to Sayyid al-Yazdi, it will also be invalid. Yes, go ahead. Added or omitted? Omitted. Yes. Yeah. So now let me give a few examples. With examples, the verdicts or the definitions we present in fiqh will be clarified. So we said one of the arkan, one of the pillars is what? Ruku'. All right? One of the pillars is ruku'. So let's say we have a brother called Ja'far. Ja'far, he comes forward to pray Salat al-Dhuhr. Now, as he's praying, he does ruku'. And then Ja'far decides to get up from ruku and to do another ruku in the same rak'ah. Ya Ja'far, why are you doing this? After the salat, we ask him, why did you do two rukus in one rak'ah? He said, I felt like I like it. I wanted to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I purposely did two rukus. Jayyid? We tell him, Ja'far, you nullified your prayer. Your prayer is batil. Because you purposely added a ruku. Every rak'ah has one ruku. In the first rak'ah, you performed two rukus purposely. So now your salat is invalid. Okay? That's what scenario one. Scenario two. Ja'far prays Salat al-Dhuhr. And in the first rak'ah, he does his ruku. He gets up from the ruku, and then he forgets. He goes through a state of unawareness. He starts thinking about, his math test. So he goes into ruku once again. The math test is preoccupying Ja'far. So he goes into ruku once again. Jayyid, and now he realizes, what am I doing? I did two rukus, but the second one was done out of unawareness. It was not done purposely. It's not that he was playing with his salat. It was done out of sahu. In this case, what happens? In this case, the salat is also invalid. Okay? That's scenario two. Scenario three. Scenario three. Here we go to omitting ruku'. Now, when we're talking about adding ruku' or adding a rukun, we have two scenarios. You add the rukun purposely, or you add it. Why? Out of unawareness, because you went through a state of unawareness. In both cases, Sayyid al-Yazdi tells you, your salat will be batil. The same applies to omitting the rukun. By omitting, I mean what? You do naqisa. You don't do one of the arkan in the prayer. You don't do it at all. So one of your rak'ahs, if not all the rak'ahs, will be missing some arkan, some pillars. When you omit the rukun, you also have two scenarios. You're omitting the rukun purposely, or you're omitting the rukun by mistake, meaning out of unawareness, because you went through a state of unawareness. So here we go to scenario three. Ja'far starts Salat al-Dhuhr. But again, he's preoccupied with what? With his math exam. Jayyid? After reciting the two surahs, he dives into sujood. He goes into sujood. And then he realizes, after the salat is done, he realizes, what have I done? In my first rak'ah, I didn't even do ruku'. I was so preoccupied with, the math exam, I went straight into sujood. And I continued the prayer. So in this case, what happens? His salat is invalid. One might tell me, but he didn't do it purposely. Sure, but it's a rukun. He missed a rukun. So even if he didn't do it purposely, because he missed a rukun, and Sayyid al-Kadhim is saying, Sayyid al-Yazdi rahmatullah alayhi is saying, whether it's done purposely or not, whether it's done purposely or because of unawareness, in both cases, his salat will be nullified. Then his salat will be nullified. It will be batil. It will be invalid. Scenario four is Ja'far omits the ruku' in Salat al-Dhuhr purposely. So he's basically playing with his salat. He begins the salat, and then he says, you know what? Today I want to do something else. Instead of doing ruku', khalas, I'm going to dive into sujood. Thinking, this brings him closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No. Religion does not work that way. It's not about what I want. It's about what my God wants, subhanahu wa ta'ala. I worship God the way He wants me to worship Him, not the way I want to worship Him. So, in the first rak'ah, after the two surahs, after he recites the two chapters, he dives into sujood purposely. Here, his salat is invalid. It's invalid without doubt because he omitted the ruku'. He did not perform the ruku' purposely. Make sense? واضح إن شاء الله? جيد. This was the definition of Sayyid Kazim al-Yazdi. As I told you, Sayyid al-Sistani slightly differed with Sayyid al-Yazdi قدس سره. What did Sayyid Sistani say? Let's write his definition. Again, it's very similar to Sayyid al-Yazdi's definition, but it's a bit different. And I believe in the last class we had 2 weeks ago, when I was talking about Arkan, I presented the definition of Sayyid al-Yazdi, not Sayyid Sistani's definition.
Oh.
Does someone have a question?
Yes, Sheikh, what are you writing on the board?
So I'm writing Sayyid Sistani's definition of the pillars.
I can't see you. Can you say it, please?
Yes, inshallah. So he said, okay, he said the pillars are the parts of the prayer that lead to the nullification of the prayer if omitted, purposely, or due to unawareness. The definition again is slightly different. What's the difference? Where does the difference lie? Sayyid Sistani is saying the pillars are the parts of the prayer that lead to the nullification of the prayer if omitted, purposely or due to unawareness. So what's the difference? Yes. Sant. So the difference lies in what? In the addition. In the addition. Obviously, if someone purposely adds a rukn to his prayer will be invalid according to Sayyid Sistani and Sayyid al-Yazdi. But he differs with Sayyid al-Yazdi regarding adding a rukn in the prayer out of unawareness. In some cases, it makes the salat void, but in some cases, it doesn't. So what makes the salat void in general is omitting the rukn, omitting the pillar, purposely or due to unawareness. If you miss the rukn purposely or due to unawareness, then yes, in that case, the salat, the prayer is invalid.
So, Sheikh, the only difference is the other guy is Hadakiri also, if you add to it. So it's a state, he doesn't add. He doesn't talk about that.
Yes. ليش؟ إنه Sayyid Sistani, he says, in certain cases, if you add a rukn out of unawareness, the salat will remain valid. In certain cases, if you add a rukn out of unawareness, the salat will not be invalid. So in some cases, it will be invalid. In some cases, it won't. Again, I repeat. In some cases, if you add a rukn out of sahu, out of unawareness, the salat will still be valid. And in some cases, it will become invalid. Which cases are those? Inshallah, in the next class, we'll speak about the cases where the salat remains valid, and also the cases where the salat becomes invalid. And then we'll continue with the verdicts bi'idhnillah ta'ala. All right? We just wanted to shed light on this point that Sayyid al-Sistani slightly differs with Sayyid al-Yazdi, and now we've understood where they differ. Right? So in the next class, inshallah, the first point we'll address after we summarize the previous lesson. The first point we'll address is, what are these cases where the salat remains valid, and what are the cases where the salat becomes invalid? In regards to what? In regards to adding a rukn out of sahu, out of unawareness. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin.